Yes, it is I, your humble host, Bill Hatch the Third, coming to you live from the palatial home studios of Bald Spots Productions here in the beautiful city of Santa Ana, California. Joining me from a more than acceptable safe social distance through the miracle of telephony are my guests for today, Dr. David Schein and Corey Nathan. Yay! How are you gentlemen doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing? Nice to meet you, David. Nice to meet you, Bill.
Same
Pleasure's all
here,
mine.
Corey. Doing well, Bill.
That's great. Now, did I say that right? Is it Sheehan?
Shine's good.
Shine's good? Okay. Go get your Shine box.
You bet.
I once got somebody stabbed in the throat. Remember that scene? With a pen, if I remember correctly.
With a pen, yep. That's a great movie. But
I can't get enough of it until he definitely goes off the deep end in the last third of the movie.
Yeah. He dives deep there.
Yeah.
So David, you've written a book. What's it called? Oh darn it!
I've got two books out.
Two books.
And they're in sequence. I've written "Decline of America: 100 Years of Leadership Failures," which talks about basically the decline of the presidency from Wilson through Obama. That was released in February 2018 on President's Day, and we are working on an update to that book right now that will actually rewrite the whole book.
Okay.
And it'll add chapters on Trump and Biden. And then my most recent book was released President's Day of this year, which is called Bad Deal for America. It's a political satire. It's a play on a deck of cards, and it presents 26 Republicans and 26 Democrats, but I don't write about them. I include direct quotes from these clowns that we're paying all this money to sit around Washington and suck up lobbyist money. So it's a criticism of the House and the Senate, and I'm working on another book after this.
Wow.
Sounds like a stacked deck to me.
Yeah, well, we use the gambling concept right through. We refer to how much they make as their delta pile of chips, and then we do have a joker. The joker is Joe Biden, who gets 6 pages of stupid quotes, and he's the gift that keeps on giving, if you know what I mean. So it's been an interesting process. So but that's where it goes, and I am interesting because I listen to a variety of terrestrial radio. Now, here's somebody like Jesse Kelly went off the other day and was talking about how horrible it is and nobody should go to college and all that. And I'm a college professor. I've never been picketed. My school has never interfered with anything that I've said or done. In fact, my school hosted a number of presentations on my Decline of America book. And so I think it's okay. The other irony for me is that I actually am an Ivy Leaguer. I actually have my undergraduate degree from UPenn in Philadelphia, which is, at the time I went there, was just about as far out and liberal as Berkeley was in California. And so it's interesting because they keep saying, "Oh, those damn Ivy Leaguers, they're all conservatives and all that," and we're all. Nobody's conservative there. The reality is that it depends on which part of the university you're in and what's happening. I don't think the sociology people are very conservative, but I was taking courses at the Wharton Business School, and I can tell you that those folks were fairly conservative.
Yeah, a lot of the you could say that some of the folks who were the bulwark against what could have been much worse in 2020 were judges that came right out of the Federalist Society, many of whom are Ivy League, many of whom are hardcore, conservative legal movement folks. I have a question for you, David.
Sure.
So your first book, you started with Wilson. I'm curious what actions Wilson took during his administration, first term, second term, that you decided to make that administration the beginning of this progression. And then a second part, I'm kind of anticipating what some of those actions might be. Do you see any comparisons between some of the actions that Wilson took, some of the actions that Lincoln took during the Civil War, and what made one administration's actions justified, and then the Wilson administration's actions? And again, I'm anticipating some of your answer. Do you see where I'm going with the question?
Yeah, well, let me answer the first part first, and then we
Okay.
talk about the second part. My concern is that basically World War One, which happened during Woodrow Wilson's administration, was the kickoff of the American enterprise, the Americans' dominance of the world. And clearly, by the end of World War One, we were it. We really were, and we've been in that position until relatively recently. And I start in the introduction to that book by talking about the Roman Empire, which lasted 400 years. The British Empire lasted about 200 years. The American Empire is kind of limping along here at just over 100 years. If you consider that it wasn't really the beginning of Wilson's administration, but because he would have started in January 2013, or actually April of 2013, rather. But he hit by the end of that administration when we came into World War One, and I mean, the impact of the United States in World War One cannot be underestimated. I mean, we came in, and I've been to the Somme battlefield in France, and the French English army and the German armies were about 2 football fields apart for 2 years. 2 years they sat there and exchanged gunfire. Nobody really did anything. And the Americans went in there, as they called them back then, the doughboys, and in 6 months they were in Germany. I mean, no joke. I mean, the United States made a devastatingly positive impact. One of my criticisms of Wilson is that he didn't go in 1915, that he waited until 1917. And I have a similar complaint about Roosevelt. One of the reasons, 2 reasons I wrote the book. One is I'm concerned about the national debt, and you'll laugh because the national debt was about 23 trillion, I think, when the book was released, and it's around 31.5 trillion now. But who's rounding up numbers there? And then the second reason was that America has very unreasonably what I call deified Franklin Roosevelt, who, in my opinion, was not necessarily the worst president of the last 100 years, but did the most long-term damage to the world and to the United States. But you have to give him credit for the fact that we did win World War II during his administration, but not necessarily due to him. So anyway, but that's kind of the theme of the thing, is to look at how things have gone, and what do we need to do to turn things around and maybe extend the American empire another 20 years or another 100 years. And it's not looking good today.
So it sounds like one of your biggest critiques is the exacerbation of the debt, as well as I'm surprised to hear you say that we should have gone in sooner. I would have expected you to say that Wilson campaigned in 1916 on isolationist policies, basically. That's arguably what got him a second term. And then within months after of his reelection is when he turned around 180 degrees. So I'm surprised to hear you say he should have gone in sooner.
Yeah, well, it's because the American people were being fed a load. I mean, the German U-boats, which of course did devastating damage in World War II, really were invented and got out there during World War One. And the sinkings of American vessels, and they did basically, the cliche about if you can't remember history, you're doomed to repeat it. And if you think about it, from 1915 to 1917, the Germans were still sinking ships, but they made this whack deal where they said, well, if you let the passengers off the ship before you sink the ship, now again, if you're dropped in a lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic, especially 100 years ago, your
Or the
chances
Arctic.
of survival are pretty damn low anyway. So they might as well sunk them with the ship.
Yeah.
Powerful countries on Earth, already we were, because they couldn't have come in at the end of World War One and won it so quickly if we weren't already a major power. But we're sitting there like little girls saying, oh, please don't sink our ships. Oh, we'll be nice to you. And it's like, no, you chuckleheads. It's time for you to clean up your act and go back and stick your heads in the ground. And Wilson then tolerated being treated like a third-class citizen. The Europeans kind of laughed at him. As you know, the U.S. never adopted League of Nations, which was Wilson's big, let's all have this big national community. One of the reasons it wasn't successful is because Wilson had zero credibility with the U.S. people by the end of it. So it's an interesting deal.
Are you in alignment with Papa Bush's for the first invasion of Iraq, and then some of the more hawkish parts of his administration, some of whom went on to advise in W. Bush's administration?
You hit some interesting points. My conclusions in the book. So the beginning of the book, we talk about the empires that preceded the United States, and then we do a chapter on each president through Obama. But then I do chapters on dealing with the press, dealing with the economy, and just in general. And in the summary in the book, one of the things that I specifically talk about is that we have handled wars since World War II wrongly. And I say this, the purpose of war is to destroy your enemy. And, I was listening to something on the radio last night or two talking about the bombing of Hiroshima when they released the A-bomb over Hiroshima, which was the second one, because the first one, the emperor didn't wise up and say, hey guys, it's over. So they dropped another one, a few days later. That is how you do war. You don't pussyfoot around. You don't send people up to, and I'm critical of one of the reasons I think the American empire has declined is because we're out there screwing around. So the answer is, I don't ever think you should have a 20-year war. I don't ever think you should have a 4-year war. We are so much bigger and more powerful than Vietnam. And in fact, post-Vietnam, the general of the Cong writes a book and says the Americans won the war. We're still not sure what happened, but they left after they won the war, and we came in and took over. And it was a ludicrous situation. But part of the reason it was ludicrous is that public reaction to it, and I lived vividly through that period, as I think both of you may have also,
a little bit.
But I mean, again, I was at the University at UPenn, where they had almost daily war protests and, people sitting around on the green around Ben Franklin's statue doing drugs and stuff like that. I mean, that was that time period. And it should never have gotten to 1969. I mean, the French were fooling with Vietnam in the 50s. Kennedy gets in there, and it actually started under Eisenhower. So I have a bipartisan observation on these things. Both the Democrats and the Republicans screwed up Vietnam, not one party. Both the Democrats, Truman, and the Republican Eisenhower screwed up Korea. We should never be dealing with North Korea today. We should have gone in and just taken it out. So my point is very simple. You don't screw around unless you plan to go in, totally kick ass, win the deal, and go home and kill as many of them and kill as few of us as possible. That's what war is about. And I think part of the reason is we've got far too political about war. It's not about politics, it's about survival. So, it's an interesting deal. And I know a lot of conservatives are saying don't don't do Ukraine. And I'm like any normal taxpayer, and I pay plenty of tax. I'm concerned about what we're spending in Ukraine, but I may be one of a handful of conservatives in my particular camp who feel that we had to be in Ukraine, and that if we're going to be in Ukraine, we need to make sure that they've got enough weapons to obliterate Russia, and Russia is identified as permanently identified as a third-rate joke, because that's what they are. And the Ukrainians have ironically proven that there's only one other superpower, and it's mainland China. There's nobody else that's really on the map if Russia is that much of a loser operation. And I'm not predicting that Ukraine's going to win. I just think that we need to give them, it's interesting, when the real armament showed up, when the new high-tech stuff showed up over there, all of a sudden Ukraine looked like an entirely different army. Hey, that's our stuff. That's what we're working on right now. And it's interesting because it's proof that the stuff that we're working on at those labs and all the high-priced military stuff, hey, that stuff actually works. So it's good to know that. But I think that we need to definitely take we are, in my opinion, we're back in the Cold War #2. And in fact, I'm looking at doing not a book, but a journal type article on a return to the Cold War.
I would make a fiscally conservative argument in favor of continuing to support Ukraine, because if you look at all of the other alternatives of confronting Russia, specifically Russia's advance into territory, to basically usurp territory that's sovereign territory. Every other option of confronting Russia is a vastly more expensive way of confronting Russia. So I think we're probably aligned in terms of how this support of Ukraine has been waged. What's your takeaway from the midterms? I mean, that's a big question, but like, what are some of your takeaways?
First of all, it underscores something that we have all experienced as conservatives, which is the Republican Party is not the party for true conservatives. It's kind of a third-rate operation that is parading as a half the country. And it's interesting because more and more people like myself have become self-declared independents, because we're not going to join the commies in the Democrat Party, and we're not going to join the losers and the whacks in the Republican Party. So where does that leave us as people who are fiscally responsible, want our society to run better, very fundamental stuff here, and maintain a overwhelming military force? And I don't mean number of soldiers. And I think that's one of the mistakes that people make when they keep saying, oh, China has 2 million people in uniform. As Ukraine is proving, with far less people than the Russians have to throw at it. I mean, the numbers are dramatic. It's not about numbers of people. It's about armaments. It's about technology. And the Russians are doing a lot of damage from a long distance because they're sending out smart missiles. They're using, of all things, Iranian-made drones. So we're heading into a very different environment, and it's not going to have anything to do with how many folks you have in uniform, but we're going to need some really smart people who've got the best technology possible, and we need to make sure the Chinese stop stealing it from us.
So you said some
no, I was just going to say you kind of took over the show there. But no, I was going to say, wouldn't you say that that a lot of it has to do with the will to fight as well? That the Ukrainians are willing to fight tooth and nail to the last man to protect their homes, and regardless of the equipment, although that certainly makes it possible, their will to fight is certainly strong enough to defeat a nation so much larger like Russia.
Absolutely, and I agree with what you just said. And I didn't mean to minimize the incredible commitment of the Ukrainian people I mean, they're taking it to them, and they've suffered enormous
Yeah.
personal losses. Their whole homes, their apartments, their families. No electricity, no water, and they're out there kicking butt against a much larger force. It, it makes a difference though, because you can be the bravest soldiers in the world. You think about some of the famous historical battles, like the Charge of the Light Brigade, where they sent horses against cannons. So bravery has its value, but you got to give them the right
Yeah.
equipment. You got to give them cannons too. So I think it's important, and I think you underscore something that underlies some of the failures that we've had in these different wars over the last 60, 70 years, is that we were in countries like Iraq where we did not have a population that was consistently saying, hey, we want you to come in here and help, wipe out X and Y, because it's not that clear especially in the Middle Eastern setting. So I would have gotten us in and out of Iraq. We would have taken out the Taliban, and and gotten the heck out of there. And I think we just need to stop wasting our young people.
It's an interesting, you make a really interesting point there at the end that, you know, the last interesting sociological experiment where we
Hmm.
have this presumptuousness that our way of life is the desired way of life for everybody all over the world. And if you look at just here domestically, it's presumptuous of, say, someone in AOC's district in New York to think that their positions and their values is the same as say Marjorie Taylor Greene's district in Georgia 14. The values of certain communities and certain neighborhoods and certain people who've been there their whole lives, it's not necessarily the same. So to suppose that our values and set of priorities is exactly what somebody, even a few states away, let alone the other side of the world, to assume that someone whose family has been in the hills of Afghanistan for centuries upon centuries is exactly what someone like me, having grown up in a public school outside of New York. I don't know, it's a presumptuousness that has got us into all kinds of trouble, I guess.
Yeah, both.
And
No, I was gonna
Corey, I
say
agree
no.
with that word. I think it's presumptuous of Americans to go into countries with very different cultures and to tell them how they need to lead their future lives. So I very much underscore your point.
Yeah, yeah. So sorry, Bill, I keep on.
That's okay. It's okay. It's. I'm having fun. I'm having fun listening to you guys talk. It's very informative. But yeah, well, we get in trouble with that even domestically. With differences between states, between districts within a state.
Mm.
On all sorts of issues it's like, okay, we're going to do this, but what way
Yeah.
of doing this are we going to use? Because here they believe this way, and there they believe that way. Here they believe that the government should take care of it, and there they believe that the people should take care of it privately, or whatnot, and here the people think they should stay out of it altogether. And we can't even make decisions about how to run ourselves, our own country. We have such disparate values.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the common mistakes a lot of us make is that we're reading certain online sources, we're watching certain channels, we're listening to certain podcasts, and we're developing ideas, often flawed mischaracterizations, generalizations, and demonizations of folks that we think disagree with us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's not based on just looking over our fence and talking to our neighbor who's watching the different channel. You know, and I always do much better when I just go and do have a barbecue with that neighbor and hang out with him and have a few beers,
Yeah.
rather than assume, oh, he's watching a different one, he's got a different sign on his lawn than I prefer, and then make all kinds of other assumptions and assume that they're the quote unquote enemy.
Yeah.
I just finished reading this book. It came out a couple of weeks ago. Robert Draper's Weapons of Mass Delusion, and one of the most jarring scenes that he reports on is a couple of the caucus meetings, the Republican caucus meetings, to debate two things: Liz Cheney's leadership position, and whether to punish MTG in any way, Marjorie Taylor Greene in any way. And what was jarring was so much passion was there was so much passion for taking Liz Cheney to task because she wasn't fighting hard enough against the word enemy was used, and that this default view, this default posture was the greatest threat were Democrats, as opposed to looking at folks who have a different letter before their name as the loyal opposition. There's this default view that anybody who is a Democrat or even constituents, and I see it in my own district, that vote more for Democrats than Republicans is the enemy, and I think that's a poison, that's a cancer that we need to reckon with, and hopefully, I don't know if there's a way to get back to where we can look at each other, like I said before, as neighbors who have disagreements, as opposed to arch enemies who are evil and demonic. So I think anyway, I went on a little tangent there, but those are
Okay.
some of the things that yeah, it was jarring to read that account of those caucus meetings.
I bet. No, I think it comes down to having a common enemy to put that vitriol toward. I mean, it happened when unfortunately, the events of 9/11. People in the United States came together and agreed that we needed to do something, and right or wrong, we did something together, and
Yeah.
we have all that we have, like I said, vitriol. We have hatred built up in ourselves, anger, and it needs to go somewhere. And if it's not going outside, it's going to go inside. And
you bring up a really interesting point, Bill, because I think that one of the reasons we're here is because so much media, so much attention has been focused on defining the enemy for masses, the audiences of certain websites and online publications and podcasts and TV shows. That there is a common enemy, but it's only a common enemy for the folks who are watching those shows or
yeah.
reading those. Yeah. So I do think that, though, that there was the election was largely a response to an understanding of not a common enemy, but a common problem.
Okay.
And what wasn't talked about nearly enough prior to election day was that, look, at the end of the day, people tend to vote against things or against people rather than for people, for people or for things. And I think the mistake was that, Biden, gas prices, and he's old, and he's all these negative things, the Afghanistan withdrawal. There's a lot of things legitimately to critique or at least be concerned about with regard to Biden. So the assumption was that that's what people were going to vote. People were going to vote against gas prices. But I think the least discussed sentiment that was driving voters' choices is that instead of taking polls about which party do you prefer to run Congress, a more accurate poll that I only saw once or twice was, which party do you see as more extreme? And you alluded to this a little bit before, David. Which party do you see as more extreme? And based on the candidates that were nominated, that the Republicans nominated, they didn't do nearly as well as they should have, given a lot of the fundamentals of the economy, and how the Biden administration has gone so far, especially in the first term of a new president, the first midterm of a new president. So I think what was driving the theme that I'm deriving, and maybe I'm oversimplifying here, and David, I'm sure you have thoughts, is that what determined the overall direction of this election was that more people were voting based on against the extremism of many of the candidates that were nominated by the Republican Party, as opposed to voting against high gas prices, voting against the concerns of the failings of the first 2 years of this administration. What do you think, David? Am I totally
Well,
crazy?
I think that you're hitting on a couple key points. Again, I've watched a lot of people analyzing things over the last roughly 10 days since the election, or 9 days. And first of all, is candidate selection. I like Mehmet Oz. I think he makes a great television appearance. He's polished. He's a nice looking fellow. He speaks clearly, but he lives in New Jersey and California.
Nothing
And
good ever came out of
Nope.
Jersey.
right. What
I'm
I
a Jersey
didn't-
boy.
Yeah, what I didn't know is that he's a Muslim. Now, I think that he would have done better as a Muslim to run either in New Jersey or California, which also would have eliminated the biggest argument that Fetterman and his supporters made, is that this guy's a carpetbagger. He came next door and he doesn't belong here. But something that's underlying that, again, the mainstream media, or as I call it, the slop stream media, don't want to talk about, is that Pennsylvania is a heavily Catholic state. The big population center of Philadelphia is a very Catholic city. There's a church on just about every other corner, Catholic church. And Catholics, generally speaking, are not going to vote for an out-of-state Muslim. And it's about time people just started saying the truth. It wasn't because he was per se a bad candidate. He was the wrong candidate for that state. The other problem that they had is that I'm a huge non-fan of Mitch McConnell, who sadly was reelected as the minority leader in the Senate yesterday. It should have been gone years ago. I don't even think he should be in the Senate anymore. I don't think he's competent to be in the Senate. You don't talk about Biden. I think you need to talk about, mumbles, as I call them, as well. But the thing is
Just out of curiosity, not to interrupt, but who are some of? Are you sad to see somebody like Ben Sasse go, or who are some of your favorites?
Ben Sasse, again, I'm not an expert in each individual politician. Ben Sasse Sasse, in my opinion, was a straight shooter. Yeah. I mean, he seemed to have a good head on his shoulders, and I'm looking for people who have normal intelligence and can express themselves. Which again, Mehmet Oz met that. He just was in the wrong state. But one of the things that people keep talking about is a couple key races. One of them was Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, and the other one was the general. I don't want to say his name because I don't know it correctly. Who was running up in New Hampshire, and what they're saying is that they didn't put enough money into races that they could have won, or they put money on the wrong dog, as they did in Alaska. So it's a real interesting situation, but it's hard to give it a broad brush and say, oh my goodness, this didn't happen. Generically, Republicans are lousy politicians. The Democrats play the game a lot better, which is why there's more registered Democrats than there are registered Republicans. And the Republicans need to carry the independents in order to win elections, and they need to do a better job at it. So I think that has to do with it. But I do feel that the outcome of the election, to me, was a surprise from the standpoint of the financial. The way to phrase it is everybody in the United States has lost a 1 month paycheck, because 8.3% is almost exactly 1/12 of $100. And so I was surprised that people who were dealing with high gas prices, dealing with very high grocery prices, I think that there will be some buyer's remorse. And in fact, I will tell you, I'm sitting in Houston, Texas, which is a very warm place. Quite cold this week. We've had this huge Arctic cold front come in, and we're running the heat full out down here in the uninsulated South. Our houses are not built for heat; they're built for air conditioning. And so I think when people get done paying their heating bills around the country at the end of this winter, might be some different outcomes, say at the municipal and state elections that are going to take place in the off year. So this could have some additional impact. But what you said, Corey, I think is right on point. That people voted for different issues. The other issue you haven't mentioned is abortion, and a number of women who were projected to go over to the Republican Party for parental issues and grocery issues didn't, because they were upset about abortion.
Yeah, yeah. Dobbs certainly changed the game for a lot of folks. And listen, in every election, there is a plurality of people who are going to vote one way or the other. You're just not going to change their mind. And I go to church with friends that they just cannot fathom voting for anybody with a D before their name.
Mm-hmm.
But and same, my practice is the Nathan McDowell Rose is focused on the entertainment industry. A lot of folks in that industry just cannot imagine ever voting for somebody with an R before their name. So there's certain folks that are pretty cemented in. So the elections, whether it's locally, statewide, or certainly at the national level, are decided by a certain group of people that do actually change their vote. And I think the last couple cycles we've seen that college educated women, suburban women, have really been the deciding factors. So to that extent, it clearly the Dobbs decision had somewhat of an impact in a district like my own. I don't know what the final numbers will be here in California 27 when all the votes are counted. But in 2020, it was decided by 333 votes out of over 340,000 that were cast. So for me in my Sunday school class in at church, that means that if I go to if there are 30 people in that class after big church, 29 of them, at least 28 of them, are voting the way they're voting, and nobody's going to change their mind. But the one or two people in that class that might vote, they might vote Republican up and down the ballot, but that there's one D that they'll cast a ballot for. Those are the people who changed who decided who was elected. So I do think I didn't mean to be dismissive or to forget about how significant Dobbs was and how significant of an impact that had on our election.
It did, and it's interesting because, again, the Republicans, as I said earlier, are lousy politicians, because they inanely went into this thing saying, "Oh, people are a lot more concerned about their purse than they are about their abortion rights." And one of the things in terms of looking to the future, with the House divided, this could be a very important time in history, with the Republicans with a slight lead in the they've been declared the winners in the House, but by a terrible margin. And then the Senate is pretty close to 50-50. This could be a very important time in history to pass a national abortion bill that will be contentious. It'll be debated like crazy, but I think it is time in America for us to have a national law to replace the Roe v. Wade. And I say that as a Christian myself, Catholic, who is opposed to abortion as a means of birth control. But we cannot have laws that say that women cannot have an abortion if they're going to die. I mean, the concept, and part of this is I go back to very fundamental concepts of survival of the species, that we cannot survive as a species if our women die. Contrary to some wacko stuff out there, women are the only ones that carry babies, and we need to make sure that they can keep doing it. And if my mother, again, a good Catholic, was pregnant 13 times in 13 years, and she had 7 live births. I'm the oldest of 7 children, but that also meant that she had six miscarriages.
Wow.
Because of the Catholic Church, she was nutso for about a year. I remember that vividly. I was in my early teens, and because she did not want to have a hysterectomy to correct the damage that all those pregnancies had done to her body. And eventually he finally sat down and talked to a priest who said, my God, it's about your life. It's you had 7 children. I mean, this is okay. This is not like an
You
elective
did your duty.
abortion. She needed it for medical.
Yeah.
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 But the idea is that we need to have a rational system out there, and maybe it's going to be 10 weeks or 12 weeks or something, but I don't think we should ever say to medical doctors, if you take medical action to preserve a woman's safety, that you could end up in jail. I get very concerned when we get too far out on the end. And I speak from personal experience. In fact, I was living in California when my wife had her first pregnancy. Was an ectopic pregnancy, and the baby was outside of the womb. It was never going to progress, and she ended up having half of her lady parts taken out surgically as a result of this sad procedure. And certainly her life depended on that surgery being done. And I was there for it. I remember it vividly. But I don't think we should ever have a woman who is suffering in that type, who would have to go to, say, from Texas to California or something like that. We've got to be more rational about what we're doing. And there's allegations that the Texas law, which went into effect automatically when the Dodd's decision was announced, is being presented as something that's fairly extreme, and it may have hurt some of the candidates here in Texas. Again, Texas is largely a red state, but it's not. It's pretty blue in big cities like Houston. I'm in a very blue area. In fact, my congresswoman is Sheila Jackson Lee, a true disgrace to the Congress, but in any event, and to her civilization and to people like me. But the thing is that this abortion issue was, the Democrats made hay out of it, and the Republicans had no answer.
Far be it from me to take the lead on the conversation about abortion. I have a couple thoughts. One is I am a theologically conservative Christian. I grew up very observantly Jewish, went to an Orthodox synagogue, became a Christian in my late 20s. And I consider myself not consider myself, I am objectively speaking, a theologically conservative Christian. So one would think that you might know what my position on abortion is. However, I'm going to read a resolution, and that is that we call, let's see, to work for legislation that will allow the possibility of abortion under such conditions as rape, incest, clear evidence of fetal deformity, and carefully ascertained evidence of the likelihood of damage to the emotional, mental, and physical health of the mother. Now, you might think that this resolution was passed by some Democratic, liberal, progressive. This was a resolution that was passed by the Southern Baptist Convention in 1971, prior to Roe v. Wade. So what I would contend is that the Bible hasn't changed since 1971, but our political affinities have changed as a community of people. So I do want to point that out again as a theologically conservative Christian. So I think there's one thing that we have to do, and now I'm speaking more to the church and more to my people, but I think one thing we have to do is we have to reckon with, how did we arrive here? What are we really valuing? What are we really prioritizing? What are we really worshiping? Are we truly saying that the Bible is authoritative, or are we saying our political and social positions are authoritative? And I say it's the latter. I think that we've come to think too often of Jesus as our mascot that we put in the co-pilot seat while we drive the car, because we got more important things to do than really listen to the words Jesus. But I'm starting to preach now. But what I'll say about abortion is what I'll say about abortion is this: is that the way I've come to think of it is, David, I don't know if you've been in a situation. There are 3 times in my life where I've been around the deathbed of a loved one. and 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 we are there. In all three cases, there was a primary family member. Like when my grandfather was passing away, as my grandmother. What we were there to do was not to go to, I called her Baba, Yiddish word for grandmother, Baba,
Mhm.
and say, Baba, you need to pull the plug, or you need to keep Zayda alive. Zayda is Yiddish for grandfather. That was not my role. My role was to be there, to be with my grandfather in his last moments, taking breath here on earth, but mostly to support my grandmother in this excruciating process. And similar situations in the two other times that I've been around a loved one's deathbed is that we're mostly there for succor and support of our loved one. And I think if we use that as a context to think about, to begin to humanize the situations, as opposed to using these stupid, hateful arguments of, oh, she just wants to get abortion on demand and she's using it as birth control. These are those. That's not a healthy or helpful way of thinking about a vast majority of situations that human beings, women, are in when they have to make this decision. But if we think of ourselves as brothers or husbands or sons, or or fathers, or friends or neighbors, loved ones that are there to support an individual who has to make an excruciating decision, I think we can better contextualize the possibility of having an adult conversation about a difficult issue. But that's all that said, I think that you're extremely optimistic, bordering on naive, David, if you think that Congress is actually going to have a conversation like that.
Oh, well, I won't disagree with your last comment. I'm just saying that would be the rational, positive thing that we could
Yeah,
do in America and
I
take
think we
the
could get it
issue.
done, David. I think if it was you and me, I think Congress should just appoint you and me. We'll have that just you and me. We'll get it all figured
There we
out.
go.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I went to college in Philadelphia during the Vietnam War, and Pennsylvania did not allow abortion at that time. And so the girls that I knew in college who got pregnant would take the train up to New York. And that was also the time period. Again, this is immediately before Roe v. Wade. They would go up to New York City, and the allegations of what were called coat hanger abortions.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, that's 50 years ago. I still remember it, and just the whole scenario. People still got abortions. They just went to other states, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense in a developed country. On the other hand, of course, there's the argument that under Roe v. Wade, we had the most extreme abortion policies, only parallel to China and a few other countries that, really don't regard human life at the level we do. That's why I say I think it's important for us to work towards a compromise. But in terms of Corey and me getting it done, I wish that would happen. And I tell my students, when I teach in the classroom, my phrase is, if I'm dictator for the day, this is what's going to happen.
David, I have a tougher before we start to sound like we're agreeing too much. I have a tough question for you. This is more of a politics question. So I've heard you express an aversion for the Democratic Party, or the Democrat Party, I think is what the famous Democrat Party. If the the Democrat, do you mind that if I get?
How
I'm
about
just
just
used to calling it
Dems?
the Democratic Party. The Dems. All right. If
Whatever works for you.
Yeah,
I'm easy.
if the Dems were more defined by politicians like Josh Shapiro, the the Democratic candidate for governor who just won in Pennsylvania, and Tim Ryan, the Democratic candidate for Senate in Ohio, who just lost to J.D. Vance. If the Democratic Party was defined more by politicians like that, would you have less of an aversion to the party?
Not really. No, I would say that I have seen enough that and I don't blame the Democrat Party. I blame the where things have gone, and I think that in terms of improving America and maybe letting us get an extension to the American empire, that we're going to need to fix our education system. And I say that as a professor at a school that's not one of the whack liberal schools, but we have got to get from kindergarten through 8th grade and into high school. We've got to get control of the situation, because, and I think that would over time maybe fix the Democrat Party. And again, I'm if somebody calls me and asks me, I'm an independent these days. I may vote with the Republicans reluctantly, but I'm not thrilled with them either. I just don't like voting for commies and idiots. And the Democrat Party is overwhelmingly controlled. And I look, they just elected Fetterman in Pennsylvania, who's an awful candidate. Here in Harris County, which is one of the largest counties in the United States, Houston sits in the middle of Harris County. So there's a county government and a city government. They're both run by wackos. The woman who is now what's the top Harris County official is Lena Hidalgo. So we had two Hispanic women running against each other to be the top person in the county. And they elected someone who's pending indictment for criminal activity while she was the chief officer. Bizarre title, by the way. The title is Harris County Judge, not like as in sitting on the bench and making court rulings, but that's just the title of the person who is the senior administrator of this massive multi-billion-dollar enterprise called Harris County. And it's like, we've got to get to the people and say, you know what, communism doesn't work. And I mean, we have to really get back down into the fundamentals. And I think our teachers have really, we really have got problems in our education system, and we're brainwashing all those little minds. And I'm trying to remember what Rush Limbaugh used to call them, but he was a little heads full of mush, I think he used to say on the show. And I will say that regardless of politics, I was a big fan of Rush Limbaugh, because he was special. He was, and a lot of non-conservatives listened to Rush Limbaugh because he's a very entertaining guy. He had a natural sense of humor, made fun of a lot of people, weren't just Democrats. But the point is, those little heads of mush, that really, really makes a difference. And I think we're starting to reap the outcome of years and years of parents not figuring out that we've got a bunch of commies in the school system. And I'm sorry to sound like 1955. I'm not Joe McCarthy, but we really whack in our education system. And I mean, granted, I told you, I heard Billy railing on about college, but my point is yeah, the colleges got problems, but people that came out of the education system, the other part of the problem is they're not getting a good education. So, I mean, we cannot win, we cannot extend the American empire, to be blunt about it, unless we have the best engineers in the world. And to create a good engineer, and I teach in the business school, by the way, but I'm a huge fan of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, is to win the world battle, to continue to be preeminent, we've got to produce the best engineers. And you know what? You can't start freshmen in college. You've got to be through calculus, and you've got to have done physics and all that stuff in high school. And you've got to have had good basic math skills starting in kindergarten and first grade today. And the differential between some of the private schools, and I went to Catholic school K through 8, but I'll tell you something else. Even with 7 kids, my mother taught us all to read. We could all read and do basic math before I got to the nuns in kindergarten. And so I really think it's important that we focus on how did we get to this mess that we're in today. And I think it's because we haven't been paying attention to education.
A lot of what I've seen, and from my personal experience in that, one of the biggest problems with the education system isn't the education system. It's the parents. too many parents are
Mhm.
have taken, and I heard somebody say this the other day, that they were talking with one of their kids' parents, um, about the kids' problems, and how, what they could do, and the parent just bluntly said, from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, they're your problem. And I think
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
No, they're
parental
not.
involvement is one of the biggest problems. My parents were so involved in my education early on, and that's why by the time I got to be a senior, well, uh, during high school we actually went all out and homeschooled. And because of their support, I was able to go so far as to actually design the curriculum for my own class, because I wanted to learn more about electronics, and I had to design the class because my
Mhm.
parents had no idea about electronics. They're like, we can't teach you this, so you have to learn it, and you have to come up with a project where you can demonstrate your knowledge to people who don't know what's going on. So that was my first foray into curriculum development, in high school, and yeah,
It's a great idea, and the more involved you are, I think the better. And I think that the Loudoun County deal, which of course ended up with the idiots at the FBI investigating parents for,
yikes.
tells you how far our country has
Yeah,
slipped. Instead of saying, "My God, isn't this wonderful? For a change, we got 500 parents to show up and actually express public concern as to whether their kids are getting a decent education." We've really flipped some of the things up on their head. And again, I speak as an educator, and I'll tell you an oddball story. My younger son, who's now 37, was learning disabled, and I was the primary parent. I raised him, and I remember when you have a a learning disabled child, you have a meeting with the teachers and the special ed teachers, at least once every school year. So I would go in a suit because that's what I wore. I wore a suit. I'm an attorney, and at that time I was a full-time attorney. And the teachers had never had a male parent show up at one of these educational
right.
meetings that are called ARD meetings, ARD. And no, no, I'm the parent. I love my son. I want him to progress. And I'll tell you something, he had a tremendous outcome by my being focused and being in present with the teachers. They knew that this kid was going to do his homework because I did his homework with him from first grade through halfway through sixth grade. When he told me, "Dad, I got it. You don't have to help me anymore." But if every parent in America paid attention to their kids and made sure that they got where they were going, we would not have a shortage of engineers. We wouldn't have a bunch of people running around, you know, thinking communism is a good idea, among other things, and so forth. Because there's no historical perspective that in any way supports. Again, I know this is a political statement, but there is no realistic, real-time support for communism. Period. It's never been successful in the history of the world. And people will even talk about, oh, what about Sweden? Sweden is mildly socialized, but if you investigate Sweden, they ain't doing all that great either. But but they have a very small, homogenous
Yeah,
population. You deal with a diverse population in the United States, that system ain't
right.
gonna
Not
work
on
over
the
here.
not on the whole. No, you're right. I mean, the only time a true communist situation worked, because what the Soviet Union had, what China has, isn't true communism. It's socialism. Let's call
Mhm.
a spade a spade. Is actually an axe. When the apostles and the believers, the saints, basically all got together and held everything in common, that worked. But that was a small, homogenous population with
Yeah.
a strong common interest.
So strong was their conviction, and if you're calling it communal convictions, communal commitment, so that one of the couples sold their home.
Yep.
And but they held back just a little bit of the proceeds,
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the dude showed up, as soon as the husband showed up, I think it was Peter at the front. He said, "Wait, I think you're in sin. You held back some of the proceeds," and he zapped, and the dude died right on the spot because he wasn't completely.
Now remember, it was
because
it wasn't because he wasn't committed. It was because he lied about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
he lied.
He lied about it, and they held back Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah, there you go.
See, I have an advantage.
Yeah,
I do 2 biblical podcasts a week. Well, 4 if you count church.
Oh.
So.
Oh, dude, we should hook up on one of those things, because there's some characters right in those first few chapters of Acts that are really, really fascinating to me. Really fascinating to me. I think it's Act 5 when what's the name of he's on the Pharisaic council, and he's like, "Hold up, guys. If this Jesus guy is the real deal, then we all got to be nervous. But if he's not the real deal, this little movement is gonna." What's the name of the guy who's saying to the other Pharisees on the Pharisaic council?
I want to say it starts with a G.
Gamaliel.
Gamaliel. Yeah, he was the one who taught Paul.
So I want somebody to write an imaginary depiction of Gamaliel, 20 years hence, 30 years hence, 40 years hence, because the movement didn't dissipate and only grew. Right. So what were the conversations that he was grappling with 40 years later, if he was still alive? Yeah. Like this movement didn't go away. Could Yeshua ben Yosef have been the real Mashiach, the real Messiah? Right. I think of everything in Jewish terms, but uniquely New York Jewish terms.
It's okay.
Yeah. So that would be a fun. We'd have Mel Brooks write the.
Works for me.
I got a question, and this is going to be a little bit of a. I could answer to some of the education stuff, because I was raised on a teacher's salary, and part of the reason that I became a fiscal conservative, because I saw the shortcomings and the failures of the union that my mother belonged to for 35 years. But I am in favor, by the way, for the record, I am in favor theoretically of the right to collectively bargain. There's not a great deal of leverage that some folks have otherwise. Right. But that's I guess that's for a whole other conversation. What I wanted to ask you, Professor Schein, is you mentioned since you mentioned pending indictment. How do you feel about ex-President Trump's announcement that he wants to take another run at it?
I'm not a fan. I don't think it's a good idea. And about the most optimistic projection that I have at this point is I heard a commentator this morning talking about, and I need to just respond to text here, so if you guys can talk amongst yourselves just for a second here. But I'm very disappointed in Trump doing it. But they said Rudy Giuliani was actually out in front, I think in 2016 or something, and it kind of petered out. So the advantage Trump has is that he has already been president, but other than that, it's
well. I was hearing yesterday that a bunch of his former supporters have been jumping ship, and some of them going over to DeSantis. I really don't know much of anything about DeSantis. What's the deal there?
I have mixed feelings, to say the least, about DeSantis. I know that he is the darling. If it's not going to be Trump, a lot of folks are trying to get behind DeSantis in order to, turn the page on Trump. But here's what I'm trying to figure out is a lot of his most visible actions that we've seen outside of Florida have been performative in nature. They've been, you could say, if you're a harsh critic, you could say that it was an own the libs governing philosophy, which isn't really a governing or leadership philosophy at all. In fact, some of those policies, I would argue, are not just not conservative; they're anti-conservative. For example, when he took away the this quote unquote special status, and it's again oversimplifying it to call it that, the special tax status for Disney in that county, he did a few things in retribution for the CEO of Disney saying we support our LGBTQ employees. He did a few things. One is he interfered with free enterprise. He interfered with Disney, a private company, or if they're a public company, but you know what I mean. That's not conservative. But two is his action is ultimately going to cost the residents of that county on average over $1,100 more per family, because he in retribution for their statements in support of their LGBTQ employees, removed their special tax status. So on a lot of levels, just that one action, there were several other actions that he did that got a lot of praise from Fox News and other media outlets. But really what it wasn't conservative in some cases. Like I said, it was anti-conservative, but what it was high profile actions, which I am not in favor of. If your governing compass is set to, they're the enemy and I want to do something to give it to them, every day, that's not a way to rule. That's not a Burkean or I don't think somebody like William F. Buckley even or Thomas Sowell would approve of such a way to set your compass. So
Yeah, well,
I don't know how much of that you heard, Professor Schein, but
I know a lot of the old school guys really weren't about being against the other. The other wasn't the enemy; it was just the opposition. And this is the thing I believe in, and that's what I am going to support something, not that I'm working to defeat something.
So what I'm trying to figure out with DeSantis is, does he have to do a certain amount of this as sort of a sideshow, to give catnip to his base, and that's not really fundamental to who he is as a governing, as a leader, what his governing philosophy really is? Does he just know in a savvy way that he needs to do a certain amount of this as the sideshow to offer up to his base? But how much of it is fundamental to his governing philosophy? So I'm trying to figure that out, because those actions, like I said, to the degree that they're actually several of them are actually anti-conservative, I think needs to be considered before I fully get behind someone like that as a candidate.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I wonder how much of it's leftovers from Trump's method of campaigning. That you and then I wonder, is this what the Republican Party has become? I mean, we talked a little bit about that earlier with Professor Schein, and I mean, has the Republican Party become the crackpot party? Really?
Yeah, I don't know which way it's going to go. I mean, fast forward 10 years, I don't know if there's some sort of reckoning within the Republican Party, and it goes, and there's sort of this renaissance of true conservatives like Liz Cheney, and Ben Sass finds a new place within the Republican Party and people like that, or if it's just going to contract and contract and contract, and it's only going to be the MTGs and the Lauren Boeberts and the Paul Gosars that define the Republican Party. I just think that's a shrinking base. We've seen from 2018 to 2020, even in 2021 and 2022, we've seen that it's a losing proposition. And in fact, real conservatives, thinkers, other politicians are being ostracized and seen in some ways as even a worse enemy than Democrats. Whether it's politicians like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, or thinkers like Bill Kristol and Mike Gerson and Pete Wehner and Kathleen Parker. Just some great conservative thinkers have been completely ostracized from the George Will, from the party, because they are not choosing to bow down at the big golden idol of Trump. Yeah. So I do worry about having a true grand old party with Burkean conservative principles.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's start our own party.
Well, I do think there are some green shoots. I mean, there's any number of possibilities that I'm interested in, whether it's electoral reform.
Mhm.
I think that Alaska is going through the what do they call it? The not ranked choice. They're going through the ranked choice exercise. I think that's interesting. I think
Mhm.
open primaries increasing as as a process throughout more and more states. So that's
Yeah.
interesting because I think what both of those possibilities do is it opens up to more moderate, more centrist candidates.
Mhm.
That's what you're seeing. That's why you have someone like a Lisa Murkowski in Arizona, or a Democrat winning statewide in the one House seat in Alaska. So that's one green shoot is electoral reform,
Yeah.
like more open primaries and ranked choice voting as experiments throughout the country. And there possibility, and I know a lot of folks are not as optimistic about this possibility, but a third party like the Forward Party. I am curious to see. I don't think we're going to have a presidential candidate, or at least a viable presidential candidate from the Forward Party in 2024. But I think we're going to have a lot of local and state um, level candidates in the 24 cycle from the Forward Party. So I'll be interested to see specifically if there are more viable Forward Party candidates at state and local levels than, say, election denying candidates.
Mhm.
I'm very hopeful. And again, maybe I'm just being overly optimistic, but I'm very hopeful that there'll be some sort of home for, the equivalent of the what was the caucus in the House, the Problem Solvers Caucus, for more candidates that would immediately go look to join the Problem Solvers Caucus, more candidates like that, as opposed to candidates like of the election deniers and Jewish space lasers stealing election type candidates.
We're Jews in space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, the
yeah,
problem with a third party gaining any traction is that we are in a win or lose election style. There are
yeah.
only
I know.
two choices, and so that third
I've
party
been
is an uphill battle.
I've been yelled at for even deigning to talk about the Forward Party because my more liberal and progressive friends, you're going to cost us the election, and how could you possibly get and my I have a lot of responses to that. One of which is, you're assuming that I am all in for the Democratic Party. You're assuming that every single one of your policies and every single one of your candidates is someone that I can get on board with. So the idea that we have to be all in on one party, otherwise we're going to be the end of the world and the end of
Right.
civilization. You know what? Get over it. That particular form of corporate, it's like this assumption that our side is always right and we're on the side of righteousness is there's a word for that, and it's escaping me right now. But it's a form of corporate narcissism, where
Mhm.
your position and your candidates couldn't possibly be wrong. And can I
Yeah.
curse on this show? I really want to curse
Sure.
right now.
Sure.
I
Go ahead.
call bullshit.
Okay.
We
So,
consider that a proper term in Texas.
oh, okay, all right.
Yeah,
That just means
that's
in New Jersey
well
that just
accepted here.
in Jersey that just means I love you. It's another.
Yeah.
Hey, how you
Well,
doing?
I have predicted in my books and writings that I think we will end up with a multi-party system
I love
like
it.
most of the rest of the
I
world.
hope so.
Uh, we have governments around the world, and Israel is going through that right
Mhm.
now. And I think we're going to come up with a more flexible thing. I also think we need to fix part of the political system. Well, in Bad Deal for America, I specifically pitch for term limits. And I think part of resolving the system is hard term limits for like one term for president, max 2 5-year terms for Senate, max 5 2-year terms for House of Representatives, and get it over with. We've got to have a more rational system. And one of the things I pitched in my book is these people are really well paid,
Oh
these
yeah.
congressmen and
Uh,
senators, and they've got lots of bennies. I think that the combination of pay and bennies is approaching $1 million a year. And they run around and tell us poor taxpayers, oh my God, it's so expensive. We have to have a house in DC and we have to have a house in our district. Well, first of all, these people are joking. They hardly ever come to their district
Right.
unless it's election time. And secondly, the only reason they're up in DC is because they get to hang out with their friends and get treated like royalty by the lobbyists. And what my proposal is, we build a giant dormitory in Washington, D.C., or buy a couple of housing projects and turn them into dormitories. And when you occasionally go to Washington, because there's actually a reason for your sorry butt to be there, we're going to put you in a dormitory and bunk beds. And I don't want you there. I want you in your district living under the laws that
Yeah.
you're signing off on. And I think it would make a dramatic difference. They don't have to have two houses. A good example is a great guy. I personally love the hell out of him. Was Congressman Bill Archer. He was from the district where George Bush was. President George H.W. Bush was the congressman in the district, and then we had what happened subsequently. But I mean, it's interesting because Archer became chairman of Ways and Means when Gingrich had his big contract for America, and he didn't come back to Texas. He went across the street. I know some numbers on this, but this is how stunning this is. I didn't even know Price Waterhouse Coopers, I consider them a big
Right.
auditing and accounting firm. Apparently they got a big lobbying operation. And my understanding is this is the year 2000. The guy was getting like $500,000 a year to go across the street and be a lobbyist under the PwC header. And then about 18 months later, his chief of staff went over there at a much lower salary, but still a heck of a lot more. And it's like, no, 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 no. This is not the plan, folks. You guys are supposed to be Texans or Virginians or Californians or whatever you are. But I think part of it is this disconnect between this political bureaucracy that we've created and the real world. And I think that we're probably going to end up with about 5 political parties. I think we're going to have to break the term limit system. But a lot of the excuses that people make is, oh, vote for me because I've been in Congress 30 years and I'm going to be a committee head. Nonsense. We've got total morons in charge of critical committees like security and the military. That's got to end.
Yeah. Well, this last election, even here in California, I mean, granted, I'm in Orange County, so it's a rather more conservative place, but than most of the rest of California, at least population-wise. But we only had 2 choices throughout. There was not a single third-party candidate for any offices that were differentiated between party. What's that called? Partisan. Yeah. Yeah. There for any partisan. Yeah. There was nothing.
Which district? District are you in?
Ask me that. Hold on. Let me see. I'll look it up. That's okay.
I'm trying to figure out if it's one of the ones that was decided yet.
Let me see. I haven't even checked. Let's see. What?
27 just got called yesterday for Garcia. He's getting another Republican. He's getting another term.
Okay. See if DuckDuckGo can tell me. Okay, here it comes. 46th.
Oh, there you go. So you have the first term Republican. I forgot her name. Right? Am I thinking of the right district?
Let's see. That was the one that was Luke Correa.
She won in 20. Okay, I'm not thinking of the right district. Sorry.
That's okay.
I should be better at this stuff. I should know my districts better than I know my fantasy league baseball and football teams.
Yes, and you should because you host and produce a podcast called Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other.
I do.
You do.
That's right.
Yeah, we haven't plugged that yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you find it unless you like killing each other over politics and religion.
Not
I
really.
like talking about that stuff.
I liked.
My biggest issue. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I like disagreeing with people agreeably. So I'm more of
Yeah,
the classic education argument.
yeah,
That it's like, hey, we disagree on something. Let's talk it out.
You
right,
bet.
right.
And that's what's missing on a lot of college campuses today, um, and especially in California, as a matter of fact. By the way, I was invited um, uh, to come speak out in Bakersfield, California, which is a more
McCarthy's district.
conservative part of the state.
Yeah, yeah,
And it was very interesting because even there, the professor who hosted me at Bakersfield College expressed concern about basically open prosecution for faculty who were not part of the totally sold out woke crowd.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's
No,
it's really interesting.
just in the podcast industry. I don't know, Bill. Do you ever go to those industry convention, podcast movement, or
I have never been to
Podfest, or
any
any of
of
those?
those, but I've always been interested in doing one.
Well, there's one coming up in Orlando called Podfest, and I'm hosting a
Cool.
panel, and it's specifically about how can we how can we have healthier conversations across our differences. And the reason I'm doing the panel, I'm not going to make the following the subject of the panel discussion, but my impetus for doing it, I went to a big one in Dallas. It was arguably the largest one in the country, called Podcast Movement. And there was this incident. One of the biggest podcasters in the world is
Mhm.
Ben Shapiro. And Shapiro has an entire production company, so he produces any number of other podcasts. So Shapiro was his company was a big sponsor of Podcast Movement. And he happens to be, I think he's a Dallas resident. So he happened to stop in at the convention and visited his booth and took a couple pictures with big fans. Well, someone saw him and apparently was
Oh.
not a fan,
Hmm.
but took a picture of him, put it on Instagram or Twitter or something, and said, "I don't feel safe. I can't believe Podcast Movement would allow him here." And and
Wow.
just it was what it was. Um, that okay, so that's that individual's prerogative, I guess, and their social media feed and their feeling. I think what really made it worse was the Podcast Movement the next day um, did a series of posts on their own Instagram and Twitter feeds saying, "This was such a mistake. We're sorry. We really failed the podcast community. We love the podcast community. We can't believe we let this happen." Meaning, let this happen that this guy named Ben Shapiro happened to come to his booth that he
Right.
was paying for, that he was sponsoring, that like so I don't know. It struck me as like, look, agree or disagree with a lot of Ben Shapiro's positions. Some folks vehemently disagree with some of his positions, but I think, to be fair, I do think that there's a line somewhere. I think there is, for example, some of the things that somebody like Alex Jones has said and done, I think are
Yeah.
beyond the pale. I just don't think that Ben Shapiro, or anyone who's expressed, a conservative opinion, or even someone who's not entirely favorable opinions for the trans community, for example, which I know got Dave Chappelle a lot of trouble. I think there's a somewhere, and like if we're bringing the line to your point of what you're saying about college campuses, if we're bringing that line closer and closer in, how are we able to um, grapple with tough issues? And by the way, who's setting who's making the decision about where that line is, and who's waking up and saying this is cool, this is not cool, this is principled, this is not principled, this is hateful rhetoric, this is not. Who's making that decision? It seems
Right.
to be such an arbitrary thing. Like, I wake up on a daily basis and I'm wondering, like, what word am I going to use, or what thing am I going to say or do that someone somewhere is going to find so offensive that I now have to be ostracized. I'm no longer welcomed in polite society.
Mhm.
So
It is an incredible situation that we've gotten into because um, we have to be able to look at all sides of a problem and apply our incredible intellect, because the human brain, the older I get, the more I look at how nature works, how the body works, how animals do things. I mean, a process, but to have that innovation, to have new ideas, explore things, to move our society forward, to be able to have open conversations.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, if some kid's out there and says, "Oh, I would be," Ben Shapiro came and spoke on my, you know what? He's a little sicko, and he needs a be re-educated. Time you take people that didn't agree with him, send them up to re-education camp.
Right.
That's it's fine because they're sitting there saying it's terrible if we have Ben Shapiro on our campus, but they're at the same time they're buying Chinese goods from a country that has millions of people who are Uyghurs, and they're saying, well, because China doesn't want dissent, doesn't want people thinking in a different direction that of Chairman Z. If they cannot see what they're doing fits perfectly within a model that most of them would say, oh my God, human slavery, human re-engineering camps, rementing camps is
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah, and yet they're participating in it and they don't have enough vision of their own sake to see that. So now I really believe that we've really lost the concept of education for education's sake, and it's all indoctrination. And that's why I say we parents have got to get in there and get started. And the little kids are now going to school at pre-K. 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds are going for a couple days a week,
Yeah.
and we really need to watch what's happening and make sure that, again, it's not that they should be taught this versus that. It's that they should be taught a center line curriculum that focuses on fundamental things. And we've got a big challenge because a lot of kids have lost 2 years of education because of the
Yeah.
teachers unions, by the way. And I'm not going to apologize for that comment. And this is, we have now got a tremendous burden. So not only do we need to get past the wokeness, but we also need to get past little kids who can't speak, because part of learning how to speak is watching people's mouths. And for the older kids, the earth, you would teach high school science, biology, physics, chemistry, how you would teach those online versus being in a laboratory with the equipment and understanding things and talking to your fellow students. So we've got a lot of work to do. Speaking as a college professor, I have an unusual situation. I usually teach grad students and seniors. I have a first year class, and they are not tuned in, folks. It's stunning how far out they are, because I poll my students almost every class and ask them about what's happening in the world. And if one student out of 40 puts his or her hand up, it's like, whoa, one person was paying attention. But I mean, like the election, did they even know what happened election last week? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how they're just not tuned in to what's their future.
Well, my tendency is to try to seek out folks that I think disagree on certain issues. Literally tomorrow, I'm having a conversation with someone who I find fascinating. I know that we're going to find any number of things that we disagree upon. It's a theologian, PhD, and someone who is trans man. So I wanted to talk to this person to learn. They were willing to have a conversation with me, and I wanted to learn what do I not know, what do I not understand about your experience, what do I not understand about what you've been studying and what you've been advocating for, where are my own limitations. One of my more fruitful and fun relationships that I've just made this year, a new friend that I made this year, is with this awesome lady named Danielle Moody. And her show is called Woke AF. But she's great. Like, we disagree on all kinds of stuff, but I just enjoy hanging out with her. I learn all kinds of stuff with her. She gives me all kinds of stuff to think about that. Oh man, I didn't think of it that way before, but yeah, but also I represent to her somebody who's not a complete asshole. Well, maybe I am. I am a complete asshole. With great
Is
pride, I accept that
is anybody
appellation.
ever an
But
incomplete
no.
asshole?
You know, I'm a 56.2% asshole. That's what I am. Uh, no, but but we get along, so if nothing else, I'm like one person who has certain views that she disagrees with that isn't the enemy, that doesn't have horns, it doesn't have steam coming out my ears, so I think that is that those kinds of connections, those kinds of conversations, I think is going to be, if there's any salvation for us as a democratic republic, as a society, as a culture, I think those very conversations are it. But the more that we there have been a lot of spaces I've been excluded from for no other reason than, just to be blunt, the shade of my skin, the color of my hair, the way that I identify as I don't even know what cisgender is, but a cisgender male, I guess, is what I am. Heterosexual.
Cis comes from, I think it's a Latin term meaning same, or it's either same or proper. I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah. So, I've been excluded based on certain data points that then become my entire identity to some people. And I don't know. Fine. If I'm excluded from a lot of different spaces because of those data points, I think that's more a reflection of those folks or groups that are excluding individuals that maybe look like me or my age or whatever. And I'm just going to have to find the grace to get past
Yeah.
it.
Well, I mean, we
So
know
Absolutely.
that people of disparate opinions can get along. I mean, you got
yeah,
you got James Carville and Marley Madeline, who are still married
yeah,
after almost 30 years.
yeah. Well, what I will say is I'm a lifelong diehard Mets fan. I cannot abide Yankees fans. I just can't do it. It's just a bridge too far, man. Literally a bridge too far.
Well, then you would have been happy to see the Astros take the Yankees down in straight games there.
Yeah, yeah. That did give me a little bit of joy. Yeah,
I figured
absolutely.
as much, and it is interesting to try and engage with people on the other side of the aisle, as we say. But one reflection I have is during the 2020 election that I'm direct friends with. I mean, we're not talking just social media friends. We're talking people that I'm actually friends with and had a relatively long acquaintances, um, picked up on social media and went after me. But one woman and one man went after me because they said, well, you're not supporting Biden. And I've never wavered. I grew up on the East Coast, and Biden, I've known who Biden was for many, many years because he's such an idiot, and he has said stupid things throughout his entire career, including lying about his academic background. That should have gotten him thrown the hell out many, many years ago. I'm always surprised that a state like Delaware, which has a relatively high literacy rate, continued to elect him. But I think that folks there must have a sense of humor that they elected him because, comedians and clowns are popular. But it things settled down. But it was interesting because I actually had to block one of the two people, and the other one just stopped talking to me.
Oh
But
wow.
it's not a good sign. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a pretty reasonable guy. I get to talk about all sorts of stuff, but I'm not going to moderate my criticism of Biden because it not only hasn't changed, it's been reaffirmed almost on a daily basis by what the guy's done since he was elected. And I think there were other people that could have been candidates on the Democrat side
Oh
who
yeah.
would have
Yeah.
been better for America.
Yeah, yeah, I felt the same way in 16 on the Republican side, that there were literally at least a dozen, if not 15 different candidates that I easily would have voted for. But
Yeah.
never going to vote for Trump. I know Trump from back in his Jersey days, building the Taj in AC, and
Mm-hmm.
his business dealings back then, and but that's beside. Hey, if I can give you a candid observation, David. Um, Having talked to you, I have a very different impression than what I thought, because I did a little bit of homework prior to our conversation, And one thing that maybe gave me a different impression than what I've now now that we've been talking for an hour and a half is calling somebody like I'm trying to think Beto O'Rourke. So you had a nickname for Beto O'Rourke.
Bozo.
Yeah, Bozo O'Rourke. That gave me a different impression than the substantive kind of interaction that we've had, and it was maybe a little more off-putting than you intended.
I have a lower opinion of Bozo than I do of Joe Biden. And
That's saying something.
yeah, no. The guy has his only claim to fame is that he's run for office.
Yeah, multiple times.
And as far as I know, I think he's come from a wealthy family. I don't know that for a fact, but based on bits and pieces that came out during the election, you know, I think he went to private schools and stuff like that. And I can't think of any reason that he's running for office other than in past generations, even before my time, there was a guy named Harold Stassen, and he used to be nominated year after year for president, even though nobody still knew who he was, but he was the perpetual candidate that they would put up, and it became kind of a running joke. And Robert O'Rourke, and part of the reason that I take a dislike to him is that he is Irish. Robert O'Rourke is a quite clearly Irish name. He has self-identified his nickname. Most of the time people give you nickname because they're friends of yours and they start using it. In his case, he used that on purpose to try and get Hispanic votes. So it's not a legitimate, even as much as it's used, it's not a legitimate nickname in the sense that we would associate it, you know, coming up from the years of nicknames, which we don't see used very much anymore. But yeah, so you saw my Saving America on him. But the way I did it is actually I went after the Houston Chronicle, which ironically, after I wrote and produced the Saving America piece talking about the Chronicle being of no consequence, they actually endorsed my candidate for county judge, who did not get elected. But it does point to the fact that in major American cities today, the big newspaper used to be a really significant source. Yeah. If the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Houston Chronicle endorsed a candidate, it really meant something. And I think that is largely gone. Part of it is I don't know who gets a daily paper. I'm so busy. If I got a daily paper, I don't know when I would read it. Right. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just as a practical matter, I think the newspapers have done it to themselves to the extent that they were in a declining market anyway. And I think they accelerated the decline by a lot of them going over to what I consider a more extreme position. And they're not looking at the candidates, in my opinion. They might have done a better job, but it's interesting that they split their vote, so to speak, over at the Houston Chronicle.
Yeah. Hey, not to end this prematurely, Bill, but I have
okay, no
out
problem.
Here coming up pretty soon, so I just want to give you a heads up about that.
And I'm going to go teach class.
No, that's fine. I normally just block out 2 hours just in case. Originally, it sounded like a good idea to have a 2 hour long show, and now sometimes I'm just like, by the time we get to an hour and a half, I'm just like, but this is really interesting. It's so much fun.
Oh, cool.
But
good. I think if we go another hour, we could get.
I think so.
Solved. Don't you think?
We're definitely on the way.
Yeah.
Or Bill, make enemies out of just about everybody.
Just about everybody.
Something that'll offend somebody in every single family.
Hey, if you haven't offended somebody, you haven't said anything. No, my question, talking about elections and stuff. Why don't we treat elections more like job interviews? I mean, we got. Mm-hmm. I got a huge book full of stuff, but some of the candidates didn't write anything. You know, it's like they all get the opportunity to write their little paragraph and all that, and it was like a majority of these people didn't care enough to write something out. I mean, at least submit your resume. Why don't we treat it more like a job interview to pick the best candidate? you know?
Yeah, so that was my biggest critique of Carrie Lake's campaign. A lot of folks were saying how talented she is and what a great campaigner she is. And I was thinking of it exactly those terms. I'm thinking, yeah, but she's applying for a job, and her entire campaign is about talking about the owners of the company, or her future employers, and the system, the
Mhm.
company, if you will, the system that she's applying for, to be rigged and to be lying and to be full of crap, and whoever doesn't agree with her is full of it and dumb, and she's cutting everyone's nose off and trying to give them her sweet
Yeah.
rose to smell. So I don't know. I took a little bit of. I know that Katie Hobbs was not the greatest candidate. I'm hoping that she'll be an effective, that she'll be effective in administrating as a governor. But I did see that campaign Lake was anointed, the next Donald Trump. I took a little bit of pleasure in her going down. So yeah, but for that very reason, because I was like, she's applying for a job and she's just she's pissing on the shoes of her future employers, before she even gets the job. So I couldn't figure it out. Anyway.
Yeah. But okay. Let's see. Well, since there are hard outs, I'm sure people have to pee and such.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and end this on that note. Let's see. Final plugs. Dr. David, your books.
Bad Deal for America.
Bad Deal for
and
America.
Decline of America. 100 Years Leadership Failure, both available on Amazon. And thank you, Bill, and thank you, Corey. Enjoyed being on with both
It's
of
been
you.
great. I've really enjoyed it. And Corey, your podcast.
Sure thing. It's Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Easiest way to find it is www.politicsandreligion.us. The end is spelled out. www.politicsandreligion.us.
And the links are going to be in the description, so people can easily find it if they had trouble writing it down or remembering it.
There
Sounds
you go.
like a winner.
Good to talk to you, Professor Schein. Nice to get to know you.
Here.
And hope we do it again.
Looking forward to it.
Final question. Do you fine gentlemen have anything to say to the nice people?
Thank you for putting up with us.
Yeah. What's that expression? Pull down your pants and slide on the ice. There's something.
The psychologist on MASH.
Yeah. Sidney Friedman.
Sidney
Ladies
Friedman.
and gentlemen, take my advice.
Pull down your pants and slide on the ice.
There you go.
Oh, goodness.
All
right. Well, everybody be safe out there. Thank you both for being on the show. Everybody remember to wash your hands and watch the ending credits.
Sounds like a winner. Thanks again.
Thanks,
Bill.
Thank you all for tuning in. This has been a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. I'd like to thank my producer, my beloved mother, Eileen Hatch. I, of course, am your humble host. I'd like to thank my special guests, Corey Nathan and Dr. David Schein. Support the show if you feel so led over on Patreon. It's Bald Spots Pro. And we certainly appreciate the support. Don't miss YWL Online, airing generally on Tuesdays and Saturdays as upload speeds allow. You can find it on Facebook and all over the place. Tune in next time for... Wait. Shoot, it went too fast. Hold on. Closing credits. Darn it. Okay, here it comes. Andrea Faye Christians and Kim Langling. It's going to be a great show. Please like, comment, and share to stay informed. Subscribe, follow, whatever you got to do to kick that algorithm into gear so we can reach more people. Once again, thanks. I hope you enjoyed it, and have yourselves a wonderful whenever.